So far, we've talked about the history and the steps, and of course, the last thing we're going to talk about are the traditions. And in the foreword to the 12 and 12, Bill writes, AA's 12 traditions apply to the life of the fellowship itself. They outline the means by which AA maintains its unity and relates itself to the world about it, the way it lives and grows. And when you read the history a little bit about the traditions, you realize that a lot of them came from the mistakes that AA made in its early years and the troubles it got into and all of that. And so somewhere in the late 40s, Bill started thinking about this, probably the mid-40s, and began to put together some thoughts on what could be outlined to help AA groups and AA itself remain unified and deal with some of the problems that had come up, both financial and public relations and those type of things. And eventually he put together the 12 traditions, and just like today, nobody wanted to spend any time talking about them, thinking about them, or hearing about them. And so it was not an easy thing to, get formally adopted by Alcoholics Anonymous. So some people have said at the 1950 convention in Cleveland, which was AA's first big convention, that he just jammed them down everybody's throat. And they just said, all right, all right, all right. And they really are, I think, as brilliant as the steps, because they form this loose guidance system. The traditions are suggested, just like the steps are suggested. I mean, there's no rules anywhere in AA, in the steps or in the traditions. And yet, just their existence and the direction that is suggested has been enough to keep the fellowship together, growing, flexible enough to handle all the different things that nobody could have foreseen. And so we'll just go through them. This will be a very quick summary right through them. And if you haven't been through them before, maybe this will just give you a little appreciation of the wisdom that was behind these. Number one, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. And I like to think that this tradition is almost inherently known inside of us shortly after we decide to stay in AA. Because of our experience with alcohol and the way the disease is explained to us, we realize that we got to get our act straightened out here in AA, because if you screw up AA, there isn't any other place to go. I mean, you almost, without anybody telling you, the biggest Bobby bad guy in the world comes in and just restrains himself from his normal behavior in the middle of AA, just out of that realization that I can screw up other areas, but boy, if I ever messed up my AA group, I'd go down with the ship. I mean, that's how powerful the disease is. And so that's what this is saying. And it goes on to say, no other organization in the world spends so much attention on the individual. It's not like the individual is just left out with this principle that AA unity has to come above everything. But it is the life raft that we're all sitting in the middle of the ocean of alcoholism, and if the raft goes under, so we have to put our own personal desires aside sometime in order to keep the harmony in the group so that the group can keep on going. But the individual is looked after in AA as well as any organization I can imagine. I mean, you look at newcomers and everybody gets their phone number and they'll change the topic of the meeting and the focus to get this person going, and then so it's a wonderful tradition, and I think it is one that came very naturally and probably wasn't resisted at all. Almost anybody who heard this said, yep, I agree with that. We got to keep the normal fights down to a minimum. And so you see AA meetings, you rarely see during the meeting itself, the personalities, the egos engaged in the warfare. And then the second the meeting's over and you hold a 2-minute business meeting, holy cow, it's hard to believe it's the same people. We're just talking about the importance of the serenity prayer. So we know the potential that's inside of us for conflict and disharmony. I mean, it's right there, all of us, and yet we've just, hey, this is an AA meeting, we're restraining all that. Yep, that'll be fine with me. Da, da, da. So it's a wonderful tradition. Tradition 2, for our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants, they do not govern. This is just remarkable, and I've often wondered, I'm sure, I'm not aware of it, but I'm sure there are sociology students that must have come across AA and looked at this organization and gone, well, how does it stay together? I mean, how does this organization, it's a worldwide organization, right? Yeah, and well, who leads it? Well, we don't have any. We have a group conscience and a loving God. I see. That runs the whole show. Yeah. That's basically it. That's about how we keep this whole thing going. Yeah, and so Bill writes about how did this come about and what are the dynamics of watching this happen. And he talks about as AA was expanding, that an alcoholic would get sober in this town, and then he'd get transferred over to the next town, and he knew how a group was organized. So he gets to the next town, and he decides to use his basement, and then he goes to a hospital and churches and looks for alcoholics, and finally he gets a couple of them and brings them over, gets them sober, tells them, all right, now we're going to have a meeting every Tuesday night in my basement, and he makes the coffee, and he gets the donuts, and he gives them rides, and he takes care of them, and then they get 4, and then they get 8, and then they get 10. Each one of them having been carefully nurtured by this one person, and pretty soon the basement is getting crowded. And the group of people are talking amongst themselves, why don't we go to a different location where we have more elbow room? So they bring that up, and he goes, wait a minute, it's my house, it's my group, I got this thing organized. What are you guys talking about? I don't want to move the meeting out of my basement. I mean, I got the coffee, and I got this. Okay, so it's sort of calm for a while. Then 6 more members join. Now 3 have to stand during every meeting, and the rumbling and grumbling is starting. This is called group conscience. And suddenly they announce and they love this man, they love all this, it's just that it's time to move the meeting. And so they announce that they are going to go to a new location in a church that one of them belongs to, and that they sure hope he will come because they want him part of this, and he's so important, and this and that. And as Bill writes in the book, now he has the choice of becoming either a bleeding deacon or an elder statesman. And the bleeding deacon runs around for the next 15 years talking about this resentment and how ungrateful all those people were that he personally saved, and they had the nerve to walk out on him after everything he me, and after 15 years maybe he gets drunk. So that would be the bleeding deacon. The elder statesman would go, isn't it wonderful that these people who were totally helpless are now able to take actions on their own? They're growing up. This is wonderful that they're assuming responsibility for their own group, and they're finding a meeting place on their own. Wow, where is this meeting place going to be? And then they go over there, and while they were moving, they elected a new chairman, a new coffee maker, and a new program chairman, and blah, 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 blah. And his only job now is to show up at the meetings and watch and enjoy the fact that his kids, if you want to think of them that way, are now taking responsibility and they're going out and sponsoring people. And so his role now becomes one of the most valuable resources that Alcoholics Anonymous has. And this is one of the main functions that elder statesmen or the older members of AA play, and that is the group is functioning, everything's going wonderful, and about 3 years into this wonderful new life, the treasurer takes the $321.73 and takes off with one of the new girls and is gone. And it devastates the group. They feel they've done something wrong, that, oh my God, we're terrible people and everything, and guess who they turn to with this situation? The original guys sitting over on the sidelines. And they go, Mac, and then, hey, it's okay, guys. It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong. Things like this happen. Trust me, I've seen it happen 3 times before. Everything's going to work out fine. They'll probably run their thing there and they'll be back. Don't worry. He calms the whole group down. They just take over again and go right on moving. So you have this wonderful resource. The leaders are but trusted servants. You see what I'm saying? There's elder statesmen all around AA that are just happy to be sitting in the back of the room, and every 6 months or so somebody comes over, what do you think we ought to do with this? And what a wonderful role for people to play, just to be around to come up with something that maybe somebody hadn't heard of before. Okay, tradition 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. If you read this history, you understand that in the early days of AA, there was a great deal of fear that AA could collapse at any second. You know what I mean? They didn't know. They just, it was like, boy, we got to keep this thing just the way it is. And so they really looked at everybody that was coming in to make sure that they were a pure alcoholic. And if a guy still had a car, how could you still have a car and be a real alcoholic? You think we should let guys with cars in the meeting? You see what I'm saying? Because maybe he'll come in, he'll have so much money, and that'll mess things up. I mean, there was just this panic that somehow this whole thing could fall apart, and so there was all around the country, there was kind of membership rules of secret ways of telling if it was a real alcoholic, a genuine low-bottom alcoholic, and not some other creature. So people with other problems, this was really scary, and it wasn't discrimination, it was fear. It wasn't that they didn't like somebody, it was pure fear, and that leads to irrationality, that something could cause the whole thing to fall apart. And they talk about the one guy who came in, he had the drug problem. And, oh no, that'll mess everything up. We can't have the guy with a drug problem coming in here and an alcohol problem. And then the group prayed, and then they said, what do you think God would have us do? And they went, well, I guess we better get him in here and figure out a way to help him. And then the guy who was the agnostic or the atheist drove him crazy. It was worse than the drug guy. He just came around and he had his hand up at every meeting, and he just loved to talk about how he didn't need God, and he think anybody who needs God is stupid. Thank you. And then they'd sit down and go, oh, God, it's just ruining everything. But he was there, and they just encompassed him. And then in the tradition he talks about later on, this man went out and had a lot of bad things happen and turned to God on his own and came back and was leading the group in prayer. But that's it. The membership requirement is the only organization where the person decides whether they're a member. The organization doesn't. You know what I mean? So how do you become a member? You decide to. You write yourself a membership card and you're in. So it's just absolutely astounding. And again, if the people studying this would go, that's how your membership is limited to what? To anybody who says they're a member. That's it. So if someone says they have a desire to stop drinking, they're in. I remember up in Washington, D.C., when I got sober, there was very little Al-Anon. I mean, really. Like, one group over here, one group about 25 miles over here, so the wives and a few husbands, but mostly men in the beginning, the wives would come to the AA meetings all the time, and they were just like part of the group. And every so often, one of them would decide they were an alcoholic because they wanted to get further in the group. And we knew they weren't. You know what I mean? They just decided to become one because they wanted to get called on and do all that. And they were in. You know what I mean? Mary, I'm glad that you're now an alcoholic. And what do you have to say on this? And so, the group wasn't going, no, wait a minute, Mary, I don't remember. It was like, hey, if you say you have a problem, then you do. And maybe they feared, maybe they really did, and they feared if they ever drank, they'd get screwed up, and that could be enough of a problem. But it was very interesting to watch that. Now, here's another tradition that I'm sure outsiders look at this, and they just go, I don't believe this one. How does AA keep its unity? How does it unify how the meetings are done, and how does it, so that when you move from one country to another, how do you know that the meetings are going to be similar so that alcoholics will experience the same type thing? Well, it's very simple. Each group should be autonomous, except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. So each group, totally on its own, decides exactly how it's going to run its meetings. There is no guidance from any central location about how to run a meeting. This is, if you're familiar with organizational structures, this is unbelievable. You know what I mean? That was like having a business and you have 20 branch offices, 20 McDonald's, and you tell them, you just run them any way you want. So this guy's selling Little Macs, and this guy is selling nothing but waffles, and they're going, we don't sell waffles at McDonald's. You told us we could run it any way we wanted. I mean, it's just, so here's all these groups, and you travel around the country, and you feel like they're doing it wrong. And you go, a 2-hour meeting? What's a 2-hour meeting? It's supposed to be a 1-hour meeting. And in Richmond, Virginia, this is a story out of the AA history, in the very, very beginning, if I even remember this when I was younger. When you went to the bar, you drank whiskey, and then for nothing, you got chasers, wine, beer, and so alcoholics never thought of wine or beer as alcohol. In other words, because you never bought it. You bought whiskey, and then you want this with, in other words, to wash it down or to do whatever. So because they thought of it that way, the Richmond group decided to serve beer at the meetings. And now word of this went around, you can imagine. If a group in Vermont decided to serve beer at a meeting, I have a hunch it would be a source of a little gossip around some of the other groups. You know what they're doing up in Burlington? And there might be a few delegations going up there to straighten them out. And then they might call up General Service Office to squeal on them, just helping out, not being mean, to get this straightened out. And General Service has the authority vested in them to write them a letter. That's the AA police. Write a letter going, I don't think serving beer at a meeting is a very good idea. Our experience shows it probably won't work too well, and it might hurt the image of AA. And if the group chose to, they could read, look what we got from General Service. I'll have a beer, please. Because there is no authority. They can send guidance out, but if the group decided to continue, and what Bill writes in here, the group has a perfect right to screw up and fail. Absolute right. And so guess what? Do you think that idea caught on? No, it didn't catch on because it didn't work. It wasn't long before the members couldn't remember what night of the week the meeting met. And so this wonderful idea fell of its own weight, and then the word spread all around, and so there was a learning curve there. Well, serving beer is probably not a good plan if you want to keep your meeting going, and it just fell by the wayside. And so There will be letters written out when ideas that might hurt AA as a whole, but there isn't anything that can be done about it. Each group is entitled to mess up. Money is often, you let too much money accumulate in the group treasury, all kinds of strange dynamics happen. I mean, it's just like, if people are wonderful people, they're all in harmony, and then somebody just mentions, we got $900 in our treasury, and I'll tell you, just watch what happens to the room. 900? How'd it get to be 900? Well, I'll tell you what we ought to do. No, you're wrong. We don't want to do that. If you're wise, you just mail it into general service immediately before trouble starts. Each group has but one primary purpose, tradition 5, to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Now we're getting into a very, very important tradition. And this is the tradition that, in my opinion, covers problems like drug addicts, overeaters, sex addicts, whatever. The other problems. I'm an alcoholic and I remember one time going to the podium, I got so tired of hearing everybody having and so I got up and said, my name's Sandy, I'm an alcoholic and a white, heterosexual, skinny, elderly Republican. And if you don't think I got problems, I mean, it is so hard to function in this society with all those drawbacks that I have. And I was breaking the 5th tradition by saying that. Because we have one primary purpose. We could have 100 problems, and you're welcome as a member. We're delighted. We all got more than one problem. But when we're in AA, we got to focus on alcohol. Why should we focus on alcohol? Well, it says here, shoemaker, stick to thy last. Better do one thing supremely well than many badly. That is the central theme of this tradition. Around it, our society gathers in unity. The very life of our fellowship requires the preservation of this principle. It is when you get diverted into trying to help everything there is, then we might be spreading out into save the whale. Maybe we ought to do something about poverty. Maybe we ought to get political. Maybe we ought to get, you know what I mean? And look at the power of AA. We could help so many things. No, we have one function here, and that is to help the next alcoholic who comes in. So if a brand new alcoholic is sitting in the back of the room and listens to 20 minutes about bulimia, he's liable to get up and walk out and look for a meeting that can help him. So it's wonderful to have all the problems in the world. All AA asks is, sure, you can mention them in passing, but focus on alcohol and alcohol recovery while you're at the AA meeting. As soon as you go out for coffee afterwards, let's talk about everything, because we have all kinds of ideas about everything. So it's really only asking each of us to have a little self-restraint and understand that this is Alcoholics Anonymous, and we specialize in helping the next alcoholic, and that'll keep us unified forever. As soon as we start deviating, we could become so diffuse and so spread out that we could lose our effectiveness. That's what this principle is talking about. And it has nothing to do with membership. It has to do with how you conduct yourselves at a meeting. And that's all that's being suggested. If somebody doesn't want to go along with it, that's fine. You just understand this is the suggestion. We get along fine even when we don't comply with this. But it's nice to understand why it's here and how important it is. Let's see. AA group ought never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise, lest problems of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. And of course, this in the early days, they had a lot of problem with clubs. And we were talking earlier about, boy, I'd love to see a book someday about all the problems with clubs since the beginning of AA. And it'd be funny. It would be a fun book to read, because you have an entity that is serving AA, but it's not an AA organization. You have to incorporate with some name, Rebos or Serenity Club or whatever it is. And of course, in the early days, they weren't doing that. It was AA, and then there was all this mix-up and of split identities because you have a business enterprise, and then you have an AA group, and the group disappears at 9:30, doesn't exist anymore, but a club is there all the time. So there are things that have to be. AA doesn't endorse it. That is not an entity of AA. And then we don't lend the AA name. Treatment centers have come up, and they want AA to say, this is AA-approved treatment center. Well, you just can't do that. AA doesn't have the authority to approve anything. And distillery companies, way back when, wanted to come and give money to educate the public about alcoholism, and then they could have something in their advertisement that AA approves of Shenley's responsible approach to drinking. But all of this was to make money for Shenley's. You see what I'm saying? And so we just have to disconnect from all those things, and look what it says at the very end. Lest problems of money, property, or prestige divert us from our primary purpose. As soon as you get your attention taken away solving this fire over here, that I didn't mean to get involved with Shenley. Alcoholics who are trying to get sober are not being taken care of, and that's just awful that somebody would miss out because of some internal squabble in AA and they wouldn't get sober. That would be just terrible. And so that's what this is all about. Tradition 7. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. Again, somebody studying our organization, oh, what's this, declining? Oh, yeah, we don't like money. That's our problem here in AA. We just don't want any money. And so the AA, this was written when everything was thought about, when AA was experiencing a lot of financial problems. People were dying. They wanted to leave money in their wills to Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a tremendous temptation to take that. There was outside corporations that would like to donate so that they could have some influence over Alcoholics Anonymous. And they found that this was a wise thing, was to say, we want to be fully self-supporting. I know of examples where churches have offered the AA group the basement for nothing. They love AA. They just want, we want you here. So just take it. It's on us. Matter of fact, we'll supply you the coffee. Don't even worry about it. We got tons of coffee. It's real easy to go, geez, that would be nice. Well, I'll tell you what happens when something like that happens. Been there a couple of years, and the minister comes down and he says, we're so happy that you're here. Do you mind if I put this little announcement up on your bulletin board? We're having a membership drive in the church. I'm sure it really won't bother you too much, will it? I mean, after all, we give you the room for nothing, and we do make your coffee. It's just a little thing on the bulletin board here during your meeting. So now you got people that are sitting in there, and they're at an AA meeting, and they're being solicited to join a specific church, and there's tension. It just isn't spoken about, but you can feel it in the room. Like, why is that up there? Well, they give us the room. We don't want that, see? And it came about because there's this little pressure because the room was free. And you go, no, we buy our own way. We pay so much rent here, and we don't want that up. I mean, so you're in a position of self-responsibility so that you can say no to pressures like that. And it's a wonderful thing, self-supporting. And it teaches us each to be responsible for ourselves. Tradition 8, Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers.